Welcome back to the Careful Practices podcast. I'm Ryder Fox, sharing the mic today with Ash Parker. This podcast is for people who envision a more caring world, who are generous and uplift others' agency, who are fed up with the systems that be, and dedicated to intentional care practices. If that sounds like you, then you're in the right place. And hey, if you're still figuring out whether this space resonates with you, we get that. We're just so excited to have y'all join us as we reflect, learn, have honest conversations with each other, and practice the care that we are so desperate to witness inside this world. In today's full-length episode, Ash and I are going to discuss our experiences with grief and rage, how they intertwine with care practices, and how we learn to be more present with these difficult emotions so that we can also be more present to and receptive of care. Before we dive into today's full-length episode, I'd love to share just a few ways that you can practice care with us today. First, a huge thank you. Every time that you like, subscribe, and share, you fuel our work. And because of you, we're able to donate over 5 times our sales from our services directly back into community care every single quarter. If you're looking for community, Stronger You and Thrive Lifeline host free, welcoming Discord spaces and peer support meetings. We also have free downloadable self-help resource guides that you can use anytime. If you prefer personalized support, then we offer paid individual and group coaching. In fact, our registration is now open for the Fall Dissociative Care Circles. Head over to the coaching tab under services on our website to grab your spot. And hey, if you're a practitioner growing your own non-carceral care spaces, then our courses and workshops are always open. Save the date for our next non-carceral harm reduction seminar, which will be held on Sunday, September 20th. You can sign up under the workshops and trainings tab. And finally, if you're tired of feeling like you're too much, struggling to get your shit together, or just trapped inside of trauma spirals, you're not alone. On September 21st, we're launching Getting Unstuck. This 12-week program will break down exactly how systemic marginalization impacts our bodies and will give you trauma-informed tools to move forward. If you're looking for ways to connect with a cohort weekly and specifically implement your practices for realigning your life with your collective needs, then you might want to check out our specialized Realign cohort within the 12-week Getting Unstuck program. All of our offerings feature sliding scale pricing to fit your budget. You can find every single link right now in our show notes. And with that, let's get back into the episode. As a content notice, we are going to mention violence in relationship to anger and rage. We'll also talk about death and dying with respect to grief and care practices. As always, please take care of yourselves and feel free to return to this episode another day if you need to. Wherever you are and however grief, rage, or another tough emotion is showing up for you in your life right now, I'm just so grateful to walk this journey alongside you and carry some of the weight with you today. Hey Ash, how are you today?
I'm okay. How are you?
Doing all right. Have you been reflecting on anything or other stuff just popping around in your brains these days?
I actually learned this morning that one of my friends died over the weekend, so
Oh, Ash.
that's been... It's interesting to record this podcast today as I'm just reflecting on like how grateful I am to have known them and like everything they brought into my life. So there's a lot of grief and also like a lot of joy and gratitude and connection that I felt to them. So
it's really beautiful to be able to carry their legacy, but I know how raw that is on a first day of just learning and how we continue to process and carry that forward.
Yeah, and I'm grateful that I meant enough to their family that they like called me and let me know and stuff too, because that's never a given, I feel like.
Yeah, there's a lot that happens. I've had a lot of clients pass and I don't know always, and clients and their families are going through a lot at that time and navigating all the other things that are going on in the world around, the loss of their loved one and the memorial and all of the other notifications of friends and family. And so someone like myself is not a first line of, phone calls, but I've often been with folks multiple times a week for years and years. And so it's hard to not have that information. And, sometimes I do get notified, other times I don't. But yeah, I hear you.
Yeah, it's a lot of relationship to suddenly just lose.
It is, yeah. Sending all my heart and care over to you today.
Thank you. Is there anything that you're reflecting on?
Yeah, actually, just thinking about grief and responding to you, I was going to share something different that's been bouncing around in my reflections recently. But as you're chatting with me already, I'm just sitting inside a different space. I was recording a presentation for a conference that'll be happening soon, and inside of that I was talking to practitioners about what it is to hold space with their clients when they're grieving, and how do we as practitioners grieve with our clients. And I think a lot of practitioners have mixed feelings and unknowns and uncertainties around how to hold that kind of space with clients, because we're often trained as practitioners to stay so far inside of scope. But what that education looks like is usually don't go past this line and be outside scope. Don't become, XYZ, whatever the person's scope of practice is, and don't get too close. Don't be too personal. Don't do that human thing. And then with a lot of our work, we'll be with clients for periods of time that are going to mean you're going to grieve through that process. There's going to be life changes and that kind of thing. And so I sit with a lot of practitioners inside that unknown of like, what am I allowed to do, or how human can I be, and am I crossing boundaries? Is this outside of the kind of conversations that I can have? And like, these are natural human experiences, and if we form genuinely human relationships, we're going to be with each other through the course of many ebbs and flows and losses in life, and all of the other hard things as well as the joyful things, and so how do we skill up as practitioners in a way that we can have conversations around grief and around other crisis moments or difficult topics and things? How can folks as practitioners become that much better educated to have these conversations? Because it's just so vital, in my opinion, to do this together as human beings, and that is completely possible within scope. But there needs to be more education and care, that helps to build that practice.
Yeah, it's so important, and I appreciate you doing that. And I think of just like the various times that I've brought grief to people, and people have not known what to do with it, or just walked the other way, or I don't know. I just think that we can walk alongside grief a lot more than we actually do commonly in our day-to-day lives.
I agree. I think that this is the essence of community care, and that care itself has to be multidimensional, just like humans are multidimensional. And so if we, as care practitioners, whatever, whether we are folks who are practicing care for ourselves, or asking for care, or giving care to others, whatever that is, formal or informal, if we are practicing into care, then we are a practitioner of care, right? And that just requires, in my opinion, that we become more and more conscientiously dimensional, that we can fill out the various dimensions of ourselves and really learn how to hold our own grief and rage, like we're going to talk about today, and all of the other dimensions of us. And that the more we develop those relationships with ourselves and can care internally, then we're that much better equipped to be able to give care to others in the multidimensional experiences that they're having.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think this transitions us naturally into the conversation that we were going to have today, but we're talking about these taboo, quote unquote, emotional experiences that we have. And specifically, we'll be talking a lot about grief and rage, but anything else that's an emotional reaction that we carry, that we embody, that, comes forth from us sometimes when we don't expect it, or however it shows up. Then how do we navigate care and also our grief, our rage, or other emotions, or how do we share those emotions and hold them with others when they're coming from others' experiences? I'm wondering if you could share just a little bit about how grief and rage have intertwined in your own life and care practices.
I feel like they're sort of fundamentally connected for me. Like, in a lot of ways, grief and rage kind of fuel the work that I do and the ways that I care about people, because I am angry about things that have happened. I'm angry about things that have happened to me, about things that have happened and keep happening to other people. I grieve the people that I've lost, and I don't want that to happen to other people that I care about, and just like other like life experiences that I grieve. And so I think it's like really motivates so much of what I do, and is sort of like this underlying current behind caring. And I think that I can just be overwhelmed by those emotions alone, or they can sort of fuel care in a negative way, I guess. If I'm like just like really angry or like desperately grieving and trying to fix everybody else so that I never have to grieve them, or sort of these like things that we do when we're desperate and feeling a lot of intense emotions. But I think they can also fuel care in more sustainable and like aligned ways.
For sure. I think it becomes intertwined in a number of ways. Just the rush of intensity that we feel when we don't even know what exactly. If I had to name the emotion, I wouldn't quite be sure yet. And it's just so visceral in XYZ situation. And then over time, we, might be able to harness that a little bit more, or to at least name it and understand it and have a relationship with it. And then, like you said, that can be such a beautiful way that we fuel ourselves in care. It motivates us and to move forward, to make changes, to become the care that we want to witness, as we talk about so often. And there's, I think, a lot of beauty in being able to tap into or harness our grief, rage, or other life experiences, and reclaim those so that care can look differently than, the experiences that we had. And we can work to confront harms. We can work to compel ourselves to do better, or to start to clarify what it takes to do better, so that we can invite others into conversations like we do in a lot of our practice and that kind of thing. And like you said, the intertwining can also mean that we become so desperate that our difficult emotions are causing us to try to fix, to, inflict our saviorism on other people, or to become coercive when we never wanted to be, and all of the different kinds of ways that I not only need to harness, but I also need to use those moments of grief and rage and whatever else to be inquisitive and allow myself to be curious enough to understand what I need to heal and how I want to go into those less healed spaces in myself.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that this has also been something that's changed for me like over many years, as I've gotten more comfortable with my own grief and rage, and just like learned how to sit with those more rather than have them be completely overwhelming things that I was either like fully stuck inside of in a way that they controlled me more than I would like them to, or that I just like disconnected myself from them.
Yeah, I think that that's something that a lot of us can relate to. I think in my own experiences growing up in such violence and in trouble for just being a human, if I had any kind of reaction, then I was going to be in trouble. And so that taught me to stuff those things down, to be afraid of them, to never ever want to be angry, because how angry was modeled to me was very scary. And beyond that, I was called angry all of the time, and anger was a sin and all of this kind of thing. And at that age, and because of my experience with anger, I was so afraid of it that I was not in any way, I was going the other direction of anger. How can I make sure that I just keep my teeth gritted and my head down and do what I'm supposed to do, right? And so to be called angry also left that extra mark on me. Like, what is wrong? I'm confused. I don't understand. How can I do it better? What can I do to make sure that I never demonstrate anger and not be that person? And that, carried forward through quite a lot of my adulthood too, just being afraid of my own possibility of anger, let alone inviting that anger in. And it was only in times like you were demonstrating, if I would say things just can't be this way, I don't understand why care looks this way, or I would become so frustrated that I started to recognize that when I'm seeing the harm caused by the mental health industrial complex or the medical industrial complex, and how people are navigating such barriers and such harm and never being able to find the support that they need and those kinds of things, that began to fuel a lot of my drive in intentional care practices. But it wasn't really until I was in my 30s that I could say, actually, I feel comfortable enough with my anger to allow myself to feel angry about, fill in the blank, whatever things that I was reflecting on and needing to heal through in those times. But it took me a long time to really develop a relationship with anger that would allow me to, be more discerning and more intentional around how I would activate anger in my life, or how I would invite it in ways that I could build a relationship with it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's so many ways that you and I have both been painted as angry in ways that really don't resonate and feel harmful and such. And yeah, just the way that anger is so often violence. And I don't think that it has to be, but it's so many people's experience, and it's just so much of like what we see. We don't see other ways that people can be angry and have that not be like such a bad or harmful thing. Like, I don't want my anger, my rage to harm other people, or my grief to harm other people. And I think that's what's most commonly talked about in society, is that it's just this like bad thing that we need to avoid, not feel. But there's so many ways that it can be more like a life force too, and keep us going, like sort of the thriving out of spite mentality. Like, there's a lot of stuff I'm angry about and that's something that helps me live and helps me fight to care for other people, in addition to like being something that sort of like burns inside of me.
I resonate so much with that idea of thriving out of spite. It's something I've taught for years and years with our crisis responders, peer supporters, and other practitioners. This is, for a lot of folks in our communities, the reason that we persist is just out of spite. You told me that I shouldn't be here. You told me that I couldn't do this or be this person, or etc. And like, I will show you, I will make this better than what anyone else is willing to do, whatever it is. Just that pure spite is such a real motivation, and oftentimes maybe the only motivation, in the sense that folks don't have other resources and other support to cling on to or to access into, to plant themselves within, etc. And so oftentimes that space to be able to burrow into your own spite and then turn it into something that grows you into a more rich and whole person, because you're operating in your own power. And that kind of reclamation, I think, is really incredible and a big part of development stages within a lot of multiply marginalized communities.
Yeah, I completely agree. I was thinking just last night about like ways that we can heal. Was sort of a tangent maybe from like care work specifically, but just like other things that help us heal beyond just like going to therapy, taking medication, etc. Sort of the things that we're told inside of the mental health industrial complex. And just thinking about like grief, about advocacy, about letting ourselves feel rage, and how these things are so vital for us having like agency and making choices, and really honoring our experiences and other people's experiences. So just wanted to share that slightly other perspective.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. Something else that was coming to mind as you were sharing is a confusion that I had as a child, and something that I see in our world a lot is this simultaneous and kind of truly hypocritical statement around how evil somebody is if they are angry. It's punitively thrust at people if they are perceived as angry. Then me calling you angry, if I'm in a position of power, means that you must cede to my power and back off and become smaller, shrink yourself, right? Become more invisible. And that same person in their punitive power will turn around and say that my righteous anger is justified because I'm making changes, or I'm, keeping people in line in whatever way that we have to, so that we can do better for the bigger system, whatever that is. And very frequently, I think there's this polarization of selfhood and the way that we see power demonstrated with a quote-unquote righteous anger, and at the same time folks whose rights are being threatened and are rising up for their life, not for special treatment, for their ability to live and breathe in this world, are pushed down in the name of being angry. It's really angering to witness and experience that.
Yeah, there's so many politics about like who is even allowed to be angry and who isn't allowed to be angry, and who is seen as dangerous when they're angry versus just naturally exuding their power. And it's fucked up in a lot of ways and used against a lot of us. So yeah, that's all very real, and I think it just makes it that much harder to really reclaim our own anger and rage, because it's not necessarily safe to be angry in society or be perceived as angry, even if we're not.
Of course. We've talked a fair amount about anger here. I'm curious what your experience with grief was as you grew up and as you've developed a relationship with it.
I think like when I was younger, grief felt very overwhelming, something I didn't necessarily know how to articulate or sit with. It felt kind of out of control. And so I think for a lot of my younger life, I was just kind of more disconnected from it. Didn't necessarily let myself fully go there, because I needed to be able to navigate life. I think that at this point, I guess really like starting doing crisis work like 6 years ago just dipped me heavily into the world of death and loss and grief and suffering, in ways that I hadn't experienced so viscerally with so many other people. And I think there were enough things I started grieving in that, and enough ways that I started watching other people grieve and sort of understand how they all navigated that. And around the time that I started doing crisis work, I was also in this Discord server where I never said anything because that's who I am. But they were having a whole bunch of conversations about like disability and mental health and grief and supporting each other through that. And it just felt really meaningful to be able to witness, and resonant to some things that I experienced around grief, and sort of all of those things combined, and just having more conversations with people who had similar experiences and weren't trying to run away from all of their feelings, just helped me get more comfortable with grief and how much it coexists alongside community and connection and care and joy and all of these other things that I experience in the world.
I think it's really beautiful that you're able to have that kind of modeling of grief in a variety of ways. And it's always, I think, an honor and something that I think is a intentional care practice of my own, to be able to model how can we be vulnerable? How can we grieve? How can we turn our anger into something that really motivates our care practices and helps us to identify what our values are in those, so that we can then have the impetus behind us or the persistence to become that care that we're striving for. But just to speak specifically to that, how important it is to have the modeling of how do we have these emotions, not how do we stuff them, or how do we be afraid of them, or how do we punitively use them against people and that kind of thing. So it's really beautiful that you had that kind of modeling, that you could start to say, okay, I'm observing people be more human, and I want to be able to practice that humanity in myself.
Yeah, I'm grateful for that. I know that we don't always have that opportunity.
What are some ways that you've learned how to be present with your grief and rage?
I think that so much of this is like time and practice. Like at this point in my life, grief and rage don't feel as overwhelming to sit with. Like, and this morning, for example, like my friend's family called me while I was at work. And like I was sitting there crying because there were a lot of feelings, a lot of grief, and also like thinking about how grateful I was to know him, and about just like the things that I've learned from him and the things that I'll keep embodying, and also doing my job because I was at work, and sort of like all of these things are happening together, and not as a way to like not feel the grief, but just that the grief was alongside all of these other things. And like that's been practice of losing people, of starting to like hold space for my grief and sort of explore what it looks like as a more dimensional thing, and not just like overwhelming intensity. And similar for rage, I just don't have the same example on the top of my head. But I think, like I was saying, like it's helped to just have conversations, to have things modeled to me, or like observe people doing these things in the world. I didn't watch TV when I was growing up, and so starting to watch a lot more TV at this point in my life, I've just seen people navigate a lot of grief to feel rage in a way that's not the sort of violent anger that we see so often. And like those things have also been helpful in just witnessing more different ways that I can have these emotions and navigate them, and learn to be present with them and not have them be so overwhelming.
While you're talking, I'm reminded of the song by the Banksons, The Joy and Grief, and there's something just so powerful about that song because they light you up. I want to get up and dance and feel so joyful, and at the same time it's so deep and somber, and they really pair the two together so beautifully that it both gives me kind of language and music for real experiences and things I've already spoken to, but just that much more can share with somebody when it's too hard to explain in simple words. It's more of this, messy, ethereal experience that's happening in this really intertwined space where so many emotions are flooding together. And to get to that place in life where I can distinguish my grief and my joy at the same time and hold those together has been a lifelong practice to get to that point. And also to be able to really name that in a way that can, help somebody to experience it anything like it feels inside of me is something that's really hard to do because it just gets dumbed down by the time it comes out of my mouth, and so I love music for being able to express those things in ways that I'll never be able to, and just to bring such life to, and the dimensionality is just so rich in that song.
Yeah, I really appreciate the song you're talking about too. And like it speaks to, I think, like the heaviness of joy at the end of one's life, or of like having lived a life. And like it's so true. Like there is joy, and the joy isn't just like this sort of giddy joy that like I might feel as a child. But it's this joy that is wrapped in like love and grief and loss and connection and so many things.
Yeah, I think that I've just suffered so much grief in my life that I can, at this point, very easily name more than I can count, probably numbers of different kinds of grief and the ways that they show up in my life and how that feels, tastes, sounds, smells, right? And that could completely overcome me, and certainly does in times, right, where I'm just going to be awash in it. But at the same time, because I've learned how precious and how brief life can be and connection can be, it's given me such an acute awareness of the moments that we have in anything, the moments that I'm just here chatting with you, the moments that I'm walking outside and can view, innumerable beauties, but I could just completely push them away or not choose to look at them and sit with them and communicate with them. The ways that I can carry a person forward, the ways that I can be touched by somebody, even in a 5-minute long or an hour long conversation with somebody that I'm never going to see again, most likely, the ways that I can incorporate their humanity into my life and carry their soul forward or carry their legacy forward because they've touched me in a meaningful way if I allow them to, and it also allows me to be that much more intentional in how I show up for others, because that moment can be a lifetime, and it may mean nothing in some conscious ways in that period, and then comes back, or it flows through you, it teaches you something. And I think that there's something really powerful that we can give each other when we can really make use of those moments. And so for me, joy has become just so present and steady and rich with depth and different types, just the same that grief has, because with each grief and each sorrow, I can say, and this is how this person touched me, or I'm grieving for a reason. This loss is taking this thing from me in a present way, and at the same time, what that connection, that person, that knowledge, that beauty, whatever it was that I'm losing, what it gave me is this, and how I can be purposeful about continuing that in my life is, myriad ways. And so I think there's just a really beautiful relationship between, our anger and our motivation and our values, or our grief and our sorrow and our joys and our legacies and the intentional things that we want to invest into life and people and the world around us.
Yeah, I absolutely agree and can relate. I think even in just learning how to be more present with my grief, it helps me sort of experience the depth of life more fully. Maybe that sounds kind of like cliche, but just like I'm not trying to keep my emotions so contained inside of like some little okay space. Like there can be intense grief, there can be intense rage, there can be big joyful things, a lot of love, like so many different things that I can experience all together and sort of be present in each moment with. And like you were saying, I think something that I learned from my friend is just really being present in the moments that we have together and taking those for what they are. I like play games with him once a week for an hour, and the hour was really meaningful for him, and the hour was really meaningful for me too, even though it could have just been like another task that I have to go do, but it wasn't.
Yeah, I think that is, again, the essence of community care, and the difference between burnout, like we spoke to earlier, and inspiration or connection, or something that brings meaning and purpose into what we do. Because if I view care as one dimensional or as single sided, where I'm just doing the care for however long whoever is the recipient of that, and it's another task that I need to check off, another sacrifice of myself that I need to make, like those are not untrue statements. And I need to learn how to be caring, I need to make time to care, and etc. But over time, my care should not be a sacrifice of selfhood. It should be an investment of selfhood. And that moment, like you said, where we just come together and purposely share each other, our humanities, our lives, our, meaning, or just the quiet next to each other. There's so much richness that can happen inside the quietest moment, or an hour of silence, or, just focusing on creating joyful memories together through the games that you're playing and those kinds of things. And when I can move from the self-sacrifice and the devoid of myself kind of care and actually invest myself into it, then I have a practice where care is inspiring, care is connective, care is, life-giving and meaningful. I think that alongside this, and keeping to what we're communicating about today, that a lot of folks are afraid to open themselves up in non-sacrificing ways, where I just kind of turn myself off, do the task, get somebody cared for, and move on, because they are afraid of that grief. They are afraid of the anger that could be experienced if they quote unquote do it wrong. They're afraid of the tougher emotions, or what they will feel like. I'm going to be resentful of what I'm doing for others and that kind of thing. And so I think that there's this really interesting play between what care invites me into is exactly opening myself up into a deeper humanity. And that means opening myself up to all of the toughest emotions and all of the toughest aspects of human experiences. And it's only inside that space that I'm going to receive care, humanity, love, in the sense of whether the person I'm caring for loves me back, or just that because I've now opened myself to this space, I feel love and can sense the love around me in all the different places that it comes, whether it comes from this person that I'm caring for, or it comes from somebody, in the grocery store picking something up for me because they took that moment, and now I can see it because I'm present to it. And so there's this interesting thing, I think, that happens where we shut ourselves off from all of the harder emotions, pains, etc., and then just put that blindfold on or grit our teeth and make the care happen, and then don't realize that it's that disembodiment of care that makes it impossible for us to ever really become present to the care that we want to become, that we want to witness, that we want to receive. And similarly to these tougher emotions, that we want to be able to learn, how can I feel joy, or how can I find hope when everything feels dark and embittered and impossible around me? The only way I can do that is to be inside the darkness and find the little joys and bring those in with me. But I can't do that without the practice of sitting inside the grief, etc.
Yeah, I think that resonates a lot in my life. And just thinking about, it's hard to do that. Even when I have wanted to connect more fully, more vulnerably, it requires me, at least for me, it requires me going and really being able to sit with my own experiences, my own grief, my own pain, my own rage, to really let that be an option with other people. And I think that being able to do that more and more has helped me have more and more connections in my life. But it's certainly a practice, and a scary one, and a vulnerable one, and one that takes time.
Yeah, it really is. I think you're kind of speaking to this already, but if you have examples of ways that you metabolize grief or rage or, any other difficult emotion. So by metabolizing, I mean that we're processing it, feeling it, moving it through us in some kind of way, and then integrating it into our lives.
I don't know. I think this is wrapped up in a lot of what I've been saying, but just being present to what I'm feeling, being curious about what I'm feeling, not trying to control it or make it go away or make it transform into a particular thing in a particular amount of time. It's been helpful for me to, like I said, sort of have examples of other people navigating these things, and even using those as a way to have a container for what I'm feeling. Like if I can watch a TV show and have that as a way to sit with my grief in a way that the grief doesn't become overwhelming, that can help me to understand what I'm feeling and process that and figure out what I'm doing with it. And sometimes I don't do anything with it, and sort of all of these things, to name something more specific, just in addition to everything that's been said.
Yeah, thank you. You've talked about TV shows a few times, and it brings to mind the This Is Us show, that television series. I was, well into my 30s, almost 40 by the time it came out, but I cannot speak highly enough to how well it models the depth and complexity and nuances of human emotions and life experiences and interactions with each other, and, making amends and navigating through healing some of the worst griefs, or just feeling them, and letting them be as they are, and embodying care with each other, and just, again, such dimensional aspects of this. And at this point in my life, one of the ways that I would metabolize my grief is turning on a show like that, where I know I can feel with what's happening because it's demonstrated so viscerally, or music, or something else where I know that I want something to move through me. Sometimes it's just moving my actual body, and dancing, or being outside and pedaling as fast as I can, or paddling as fast as I can, or getting in the choppiest of waters so that I can feel the rage that's flowing through me right now, or whatever. And so I think that there are a lot of ways that, as we start to have a relationship with our grief, rage, or other difficult emotions, that I can kind of name how that feels in my body, or what part of my body is experiencing it, or whether it's crying that I need to do, or screaming, or chanting. What is it that brings a resonance to the experiences, so that those feelings can rise up enough that they are sat with and cared for. And then, like you said, to then be curious about, okay, what specifically is this feeling or that one, and why is it coming up right now, or what is that? For me, that's usually a visual process. By the time I get to the kind of naming it, it's not words as much as it's visuals, and then there will be some kind of montage that goes in the screen of my brains, and then from there it will start to have language. And as I reflect on that in a more kind of language-based way and communicate that with others, then it's a way that I can build that into a clarity in my life until it becomes, a more integrated practice. And I think that having conversations like this, and I think you mentioned this, is how do I learn these things if it's not modeled, but also how can we model it if we don't get comfortable talking about it? And so I think that one of those steps is just really finding people to have these intentional conversations with, and let ourselves really feel the things that we feel. I do have to say, though, I've joked in the past about being Saturnian in a big part of myself, and it's not wrong, but these conversations have clarified for me how much my coping strategies are to receive something that it's coming in, feel what I don't like about it or what I like about it or whatever. Accept it. Build a discipline around that acceptance and then integrate that into my life to the point that it may sometimes be a maladaptive coping strategy, but we don't believe in maladaptive coping strategies, right?
It could be a coping strategy that's not as useful for you.
Yeah, sometimes I think.
Every moment.
I think that sometimes I'm a little over good at taking the responsibility for things and just incorporating a what is into my what is and not realizing that maybe it doesn't have to be exactly like this.
Yeah.
Or maybe there's other responsibilities that could be taken, not just mine. But, growth.
I feel like it's hard to completely unwind all of those ways that we've learned to exist in the world.
It is. It's hard to be a person.
Yes.
What are some things that grief and rage have taught you about care?
I think like you were saying before, like how to be present inside of the moments that I have, and how to make something feel sustained. I don't know, like grief and rage are the only things that fuel my care, but it's certainly a part of it. And I think if I didn't feel the grief and the rage that I feel, like I wouldn't necessarily show up for people in the ways that I do, or so fully, or so passionately. And so like that's definitely shaped who I am inside of care work. But yeah, just like really honoring what we have together, and I think like being able to model grief and rage and sort of living alongside of all of these things to other people is something I've started thinking about more recently. Didn't seem like something that I could do for a lot of my life. It's kind of weird to think about modeling things for other people, but it's true. It's true for all the reasons that you've said, Ryder, and like all the reasons that it's been helpful for me to witness people doing this. So yeah. What about you?
I just have to pause and speak to your agedness because you're turning around and mentoring everybody else now. And it's really beautiful. Welcome to being a little bit older, but it's fun. It's been a really huge joy to watch you grow and to watch somebody who has gone from easily broken around or shy around these more difficult taboos and what's going to get into some kind of trouble, or how do we, feel intensity without causing harm and those kinds of things, or feeling guilty because we are intense and all of that. And it's just been huge watching that evolve in you in these last many years.
Thank you.
I think we've talked a fair amount about this, like you said, just like being able to be inside the moments are one of the hugest things, and to really relish each and every, and to be purposeful, and not that I make my day some sort of disciplined absolute, I'm going to do this and do that and do the other thing and make each moment count. But at the same time, I pause so much more in my life now and relish moments rather than move through whatever things, like tasks can be done anytime. The meetings I'm in can accomplish so much, and it's okay if they don't. Whatever it is this is the connection point that we have. Yeah, we've talked a lot to that being inside the moment, but I think with rage too, I've learned so much about what we can identify in that for me. And I don't know what your experience is exactly, but I learn my values. I learn what I want to evolve into and what I want to evolve out of when I'm angry. I have this constant from the time I was, very young in my career, like teenage still. I was asking this, why is it this way? It doesn't need to be this way. It doesn't have to be like this. This doesn't make any sense. And that kind of driving force has been the curator, the catalyst for the work that I do now, and I wasn't asking, how can I put a rocket ship on the moon? I was not sitting inside that kind of curiosity that could draw me to other career paths or whatever. I was watching people be harmed and watching people suffer and watching resources not be available, and et cetera, et cetera. And those things were burning inside of me all of the time and inviting me to say, what else can we do and how can we do this better? And, all of the different experiences that I've had where I could sacrifice and then suddenly cannot. And I'm, infuriated or enraged in some kind of way. And that has given me that clarity to say, oh, actually, this is where I need a boundary, or this is where I need to communicate things better in the future, or, whatever thing that it is. And so anytime that I've noticed, and especially anger can be slower for me because it took me a long time to even invite it into my life, right? So it may have a very slow burn and then a sudden presence. And, I've tried to invite that in earlier and to recognize the greater tensions and things that are surrounding that in my life. So it's not a sudden burst. And at the same time, I've learned how that can clarify who I want to be and the kinds of relationships that I want to set up in my life, or the kinds of ways that I want to distribute my hours and my resources and all of those kinds of things. And so if I didn't have these experiences, I wouldn't be able to both have the discipline and the commitment that I have toward the care that I want to provide, or the care that I want to be, or the care that I want to receive. But also I wouldn't recognize the edges of me in the same way, and how I want to be related to and how I want to relate to others. So I think that there's been such a clarifying and values bringing aspect to anger and rage, that have really allowed me to grow my relationship with myself and be that much more purposeful in how I show up or how I provide care.
Yeah, I agree. I wasn't thinking about this question on that perspective for some reason, but yeah, I think there's this thing that we say, grief is love with nowhere to go, and I think that that's true. I think that grief is more than just love, depending on the situation. There's so many different things that we can grieve, but it's something that mattered. There's a reason that I'm grieving it, like you said earlier, and so I think it tells me what matters to me. And similarly with rage, what matters to me, what's not okay with me, what are my values, what do I want to fight for, sort of all of these things I can learn from grief and from rage, that I wouldn't know as intimately if I didn't let myself feel the grief and the rage.
Yeah, there's just something to intimacy that requires us to go there, and to go there as nakedly as we can. And I think I also want to clarify on the other side of that it's not going to be as consuming as we think it is. There may be times where, because of our trauma and because of our lack of relationship, our inability to form relationship because it's been unsafe. I don't mean that we're just all, furiously not willing to navigate grief and rage and etc. I think that we've not been safe to do so, and that's a really valid thing to, not be able to end up having those safe relationships within ourselves. And so there are experiences certainly where we're so emotionally overcome, and I've had any number of those myself, and so I understand why we carry fear, not just because of the lack of safety and punitive experiences on the other side, but also for this, if I become consumed by rage or grief, then I won't be able to go to work. I won't be able to take care of my kids. I won't be able to do my life. I will, everything will fall apart. And I think that one thing I'd love to share with folks is like those times may come here and there, and they may be that point that just allows things to flow through and get that process started because it's new. It hasn't happened yet. There's not a habit, a relationship that's built, but our bodies know, our minds know the tolerances that we have around those things. And when they can get released, then they get heard. Even, use this time now to say, how can I hear myself in the smaller ways? Or if that flood happens and I don't have anyone around, how am I going to make sure that I can be on the other side of me? Or what can I tap in? And we have a lot of resources if you need to tap into something and there's nobody else around you. But those floodgates won't be forever. The mind moves through, the body moves through, and it's just that our bodies are carrying so much pain and they need to be able to be felt somewhere. And so I think that a lot of us are afraid of looking into these things or building these relationships with our grief and fear because of that sense of, but then everything will be lost. And I think one thing I remind myself, is that I have lost everything more than once in my life, and I'm still here persisting in the ways that I do. And also at each one of those completely broken points, after some period of time, the brokenness started to recede a little bit, enough that I could find joy, enough that I could pick my body up and feed it, that I could start to rebuild in some kind of way. And so I don't think that, at least for myself, I need to linger inside the fear of being consumed by grief and rage, that these periods may arise where I break, and my mind and body need to release. But it's also helped me to not be afraid of them to the point that I can build a more ongoing and intentional relationship with them so that I can break on a daily basis a little bit, or here and there. I mean, I'm pretty intentional about a regular grief practice, but, not necessarily every single day. But those smaller breaks have just allowed me to have this kind of full movement process where I can understand it and relate to it more quickly and with greater presence rather than, fearing it and then feeling like I'm going to have to dedicate 3 weeks of my life because I'll be completely broken and then everything will fall apart on the other side and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I know this was like one of the things that I was scared about when I was younger. And I've also fallen apart. But at the same time, I'm here. I'm doing this podcast. And I think there's ways that we can pick ourselves up. I at least am somebody who likes to go to the very bottom of things and then figure out where I can go from the bottom. And that helps me be less afraid of myself and my experiences. I know that's not true for everybody. But if it is for you, then you're not alone in that.
Are there ways that you're able to cope with the idea that grief, rage, or any other difficult emotions going to continue to be a part of the world that we're in, at least the world that we're in right now, and that the world's going to continue to fail to be what we want it to be?
I mean, I think just the fact that grief and rage aren't just existing in isolation. Like, I wouldn't feel grief if there weren't things that mattered to me. I wouldn't feel rage if there weren't things that mattered to me. And I want to keep experiencing the things that matter to me. And I can hold all of those things together. There was fan fiction that I read like 6 years ago that spoke to this. Just, it wasn't like revolutionary or anything, but I think just spoke to it in a way that I hadn't fully thought about at that point in my life yet. It's about like a couple of friends who had lost their third friend like 10 years ago ish, and one of them recently went through a lot of trauma and is just sort of reflecting on the fact that he is so stuck inside of all of the trauma and all of the panic and like just doesn't know how to live. And the other friend has navigated all of these same things and is just trying to make a life for himself still. And it's just like this yes, we carry this grief with us. Yes, we carry this pain with us. We have these memories. We have this rage. And I can keep carrying that. I have been carrying that. And like that's okay. I want to keep carrying that. That doesn't mean that I like don't also feel suicidal and don't also want to die because of how many shitty things happen in this world and things that have happened to me, but sort of coexisting alongside that, like I want to be able to experience the depth of things too.
Yeah, I really appreciate you naming that. I feel like learning how to coexist with all of these challenges is what helps us to be who we're becoming and helps us to be whole people, at least in my experience. I remember two very, very distinct periods in my life, both as a teenager when I was getting kicked out of my family and then as a person in my 20s, where I knew somehow, I was so young, I don't even know how I understood this, but I understood with great clarity that I had kind of a choice where I could become somebody who doesn't feel these things and therefore a very cynical and cold and detached person, or I can feel these things and become more connected and more whole and more, able to experience belief, joy, hope, whatever the things that are the lighter sides of our emotions. But I really understood somehow that I was at that crossroads and could make that decision. And I recognized that if I did not choose to receive grief and receive rejection and receive loss, not that I'm advocating for it, not that I want to suffer it, and I do this work really trying to stand in the gap so that other people don't have to suffer. And at the same time, my life has taught me over and over again that it is specifically because I'm willing to take that risk and suffer, or take that risk and be rejected, or take that risk and lose, that I have been able to feel the breadth and depth of joy and connectedness and, the amount of different human experiences and all of the rainbow of spectrums that can come in those, and the bizarre life experiences that I've had that reach in ways that a younger me could never have possibly envisioned. And I wouldn't have that or be able to tie myself so groundedly into it and experience it in a full-bodied way if it hadn't been for the willingness to experience the things that I don't want to feel, And like you said, I wouldn't know the real flavor of joy. I wouldn't know how rich it is to feel embodied or to feel clear and intentional and driven if I didn't know all of the flavor of my grief and rage and so on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Before we wrap up, I'm wondering if there are any thoughts you want to leave folks who are considering how rage and grief show up in their own care practices.
I think I say this a lot, but just that it's a practice, that it takes time, that maybe you're different, but I certainly couldn't just go be like, okay, I'm going to open myself up to all of the grief and the rage that I feel, and I'm going to open myself up to all of the intense emotions that other people feel. It doesn't just happen like that. Like, even if I am logically open to it, that doesn't necessarily mean that I know how to receive it or know how to feel it or know how to attune with somebody. And that's taken time. It will still continue to take time for me to really be able to sit with things and process them and roll them around in my brain and sort of all of that. So just give yourself grace if you're trying to figure it out.
Yeah, absolutely. We don't need to do all of this at one time. Again, our bodies may go through these periods because they are carrying all of this trauma inside them. So there may be times where it feels like the floodgates are opening and our bodies just need to release. Our minds need to finally get, a stuck point moved through because it's just too much to carry. But that's not it doesn't have to be the all the time experience if we continue to build these relationships. And so if I'm doing this with an intentional practice, I can take a single thing that gives me a little bit of pause around, I think this is sorrowful, or I'm afraid I might lose this, not even something I have lost and then I'm going to metabolize that higher level loss. I can just say if I'm honest, I'm afraid I'm going to lose this thing that I'm really attached to, this person that I really care for, and if I'm honest, I can give myself a few moments to remind myself why that person matters so much to me, or what this thing that I don't want to lose has brought into my life, and continue to let that be enriched. I don't even have to sit in the sorrow of it. I can say, you know what, if I'm honest, this is what I don't want to lose, and this is how I can intentionally clarify its meaning or their meaning in my life, and then lean into that. Tell people thank you and what they mean to you. Those are really small practices, but very meaningful practices. And as we take those times, then that just starts to move through us. We start to notice the other edges of our grief and our rage and so on. And so I think I can't say this enough in any of the advice giving portions of our podcast, but the tiniest things are so meaningful. Do the little thing. It doesn't have to be so big, and just pick one at a time.
Yeah, I think at least for me, there's nothing that feels like it fully encompasses all of the grief or the rage that I feel, but it's all of the little things that sort of create a practice that help me build more and more comfort and space for my own experiences and others' experiences.
Well, thank you, Ash, so much again for joining. As always, it's just such a pleasure to get to share the mic with you. Everyone who joined us on the Careful Practices podcast today, thank you all so much. Tell somebody today that you love them. Tell them why they matter to you. And find one thing that brings you joy. And we'll be back next week to share just a little bit more specifically about how we have built intentional grief practices.